the philosophical foundations of Bitcoin, like how do you see Bitcoin outside of just a basic protocol and a basic currency? It seems to be, like you said, it seems like sturdy ground. So what do you mean by this?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's not just any protocol for moving value around. It's not just any currency. It's got specific rules and values that are embedded in it. And this is an important point, is the Bitcoin is the encoding of certain values, which are often misunderstood or not acknowledged necessarily. And so it's sort of impregnated with values. And what they are specifically is a topic of debate. And there have been civil wars fought over the values inherent in Bitcoin. You know, one of them was, should Bitcoin be this cheap, scalable, the base layer, low fee payments system with an emphasis on P2P payments, or should it be more of this like gold like digital commodity that would eventually settle infrequently and mainly between institutions, right? So that's fundamentally a conflict of visions, right? So, you know, keep in mind that this is just one man's opinion. I don't speak for Bitcoin, right? So I would say the key number one value that's embedded in Bitcoin is the notion of non-discretionary monetary policy. So algorithmic monetary policy as opposed to human-based monetary policy. Satoshi was very clear about that. Bitcoin is an alternative to modern central banking, where you have constant tweaking, constant intervention, which Satoshi felt leads to credit bubbles and so on. So Bitcoin proposes a completely non-discretionary monetary policy, sort of decays over time. 50% of the coins were issued in the first 4 years, and then the next 25% in the next 4 years, then 12.5% in the next 4 years, until you get to 21 million units. And none of those numbers really matter. Like it could have been 25 million units, and it could have been a more aggressive slope or a more gradual slope. But what matters is that this schedule was proposed even before the code was public. The schedule was proposed, and then we all collectively agreed to stick to it. And that is kind of a first for a monetary system. I mean, gold kind of has that property, right? Because the supply of gold above ground only really increases at 1% to 2% a year. So it's sort of inhuman, which is a good feature, right? You don't want to give humans that much control over it. Bitcoin is a much more, you know, fastidious approach to that. It really is super concrete about what the supply schedule is, and the fact, crucially, that it can't change. So we can't have a bailout of debtors. Let's say a lot of people had debts denominated in Bitcoin, and we needed loose, accommodative monetary policy to bail them out. That's not possible. We couldn't have a jubilee denominated in Bitcoin, because the social contract that we've all, you know, bought into and committed to is that it's non-discretionary. So that's sort of one of the first things. And I think ultimately that comes back to basically a strong respect for property rights. Because if we were to have unanticipated inflation, let's say, you know, a really charismatic leader somehow commandeered Bitcoin and convinced everyone that we should have 30 million units and not 21 million, that would basically be dilutive on everybody that held Bitcoin and had opted into the 21 million set of coins. An additional 9 million unanticipated would have a dilutive effect on everyone else. And that would be a covert way of effectively stealing their purchasing power through inflation.
Is that possible, that kind of thing? I mean, what's the mechanism of Bitcoin that resists that kind of charismatic leader?
Well, we've had people that have had a lot of influence in Bitcoin in the past, and they've tried to make changes to the protocol, not as dramatic as that. But Bitcoiners have generally resisted those individuals, institutions, and they, you know, Bitcoiners have a good track record of sort of staying true to those core values.
So you mentioned values and like sticking to the monetary thing, but there's bigger values. There's almost like psychological values that are instilled in Bitcoin. You make a point that Bitcoin for many is a vessel, quote, for their expectations, hopes, and dreams. Can the Bitcoin protocol support this kind of complexity of the human condition? So like, There's ideas of freedom that seem to be spoken about. There's a sort of ideas of I mean, even love.
Yeah.
I mean, some people kind of use it as a meme, like, Bitcoin is love or something like that. Mostly to troll me because I talk about love all the time. But these bigger ideas than just the exchange of currencies.
Yeah, I mean, Bitcoin itself is very simple, I would say. Like, ultimately, it doesn't, pretend to do very much. It really just settles transactions. But people do superimpose their own views on it for sure. Um, and Bitcoin's qualities give rise to these perceptions of it having censorship resistance or giving you transactional freedom or a measure of transactional privacy. So, because anyone can operate a node and join the consensus process, and because mining is a competitive free market process, that means that it's likely that you can't be censored by the miners. So that means you have transactional freedom. So you have these computer science technical features of the system that cause it to have these political qualities, which is it's very hard or impossible to censor a specific individual. So it's interesting to see that flow. But so that's one of the core values for sure is the censorship resistance. Then you have the fact that it's a cryptographic based system, and you can hold value in your brain by memorizing 12 words, for instance. That gives it seizure resistance, which is again a political concept. If you wanted to desert your jurisdiction with your wealth intact in your brain, that cryptographic feature of the system, the fact that it's built on public key cryptography and that you can encode a Bitcoin private key in 12 words, that gives it this political salience that you're now empowered relative to a despot, basically.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many beautiful concepts behind cryptocurrency, behind Bitcoin, that stand for sort of freedom. Some of the basic things at the founding of this country. The one thing I don't like personally behind Bitcoin and cryptocurrency is that money is involved, and it's like people's life savings sometimes are involved. So there is naturally a kind of fear, a self-preservation, like instinctual kind of dogmatic thing that comes in, where you're not the best of human nature. You stop being a George Washington, and you lose touch of the like foundational principles, which I think are beautiful, just like the founding principles of this country. So that's just like so I like staying on the level of like the philosophy
Mm.
versus the level of like all my money is invested in Bitcoin. And that becomes very tricky territory to have principled discussions
Yeah.
about ideas.
Well,
It's an interesting
I
tension.
I try to stay balanced despite being very exposed to Bitcoin. So